1. Nazi human experiments. When people talk about the darkest experiments in history, the ones conducted by Nazi Germany are often the first that come to mind, and for good reason. Inside concentration camps like Auschwitz, prisoners were treated as test subjects rather than human beings. Doctors performed experiments without anesthesia, causing unbearable pain. Some victims were placed in freezing conditions to study hypothermia, while others were infected with diseases like malaria and typhus to test drugs. One of the most infamous figures, Josef Mengele, carried out cruel experiments on twins, attempting to explore genetics through invasive and often deadly procedures. Many died during these experiments, and those who survived were left permanently scarred, both physically and mentally. These actions were not random acts of cruelty. They were organized, systematic, and justified under the false belief of scientific progress. After the war, the world was horrified, leading to the creation of strict medical ethics guidelines like the Nuremberg Code. It stands as a warning of how science, when separated from humanity, can become terrifying. 2. The Stanford Prison Experiment. This is one experiment almost everyone has heard about, and it's scary because it feels so real. In 1971, psychologist Philip Zimbardo set up a fake prison at Stanford University to study how people behave in positions of power. Volunteers were randomly assigned roles as guards or prisoners. At first, it seemed like simple role play, but within just a few days, things got disturbing. Guards began to act cruel, humiliating prisoners, controlling their sleep, and using psychological abuse. Prisoners, on the other hand, became anxious, depressed, and emotionally broken. Some even had to be released early due to mental distress. The experiment was supposed to last 2 weeks but was shut down after only 6 days. Why? Because it went too far. The most chilling part is that these were ordinary students, not trained actors or criminals. It showed how quickly people can lose themselves when given power or stripped of it. It makes you wonder, if you were in that situation, which role would you play? 3. The Tuskegee Syphilis Study. For 40 years, from 1932 to 1972, a group of African-American men in Alabama were unknowingly part of a medical experiment that still shocks people today. They were told they had bad blood and were promised free treatment, meals, and burial insurance. But in reality, doctors were studying untreated syphilis to observe how it destroys the body over time. Even after penicillin became a proven cure in the 1940s, treatment was intentionally withheld. That means doctors knowingly allowed men to suffer, go blind, lose their mental stability, and eventually die. It didn't stop there. The disease spread to their wives, and some children were born infected. What makes this case so disturbing is not just the suffering, but the betrayal. These men trusted the system meant to help them. The experiment only ended after it was exposed to the public, causing nationwide outrage. Even today, this study is often used as an example of how deeply unethical research can damage trust in healthcare systems for generations. 4. Unit 731 to Japan's secret laboratory. Hidden during World War II, Unit 731 carried out some of the most horrifying human experiments ever recorded. Based in occupied China, this secret unit used prisoners, many of them civilians, as live test subjects. Victims were deliberately infected with deadly diseases like plague, cholera, and anthrax to observe how these illnesses spread and killed. Some were dissected alive without anesthesia so scientists could examine their organs in real time. Others were exposed to extreme cold to study frostbite, with limbs frozen and then thawed to observe damage. There were even tests involving weapons, where humans were used to measure the effects of explosions and chemical agents. Thousands died in these experiments. What's even more disturbing is what happened after the war. Many of the scientists involved were granted immunity in exchange for their research data. Justice was never fully served. This story remains one of the darkest examples of how human life can be devalued in the name of science and war. 5. The Milgram Obedience Experiment. Here's a question for you. Would you hurt someone if an authority figure told you to? In 1961, psychologist Stanley Milgram tested this idea in a now famous experiment. Participants were told they were helping in a learning study. Their task was to deliver electric shocks to another person whenever they gave a wrong answer. The shocks weren't real, but the participants didn't know that. As the voltage increased, the victim, an actor, screamed, begged for mercy, and eventually went silent. Despite this, many participants continued simply because a scientist told them to. Around 65% went all the way to the highest level. Some were clearly uncomfortable, sweating, and shaking, but they obeyed anyway. That's what makes this experiment so disturbing. It revealed how easily ordinary people can follow orders, even when it conflicts with their morals. It's often used to explain how people in history committed terrible acts while claiming they were just following orders. Honestly, it makes you question human nature itself. 6. MK Ultra Mind Control Program. During the Cold War, the CIA secretly launched a program called MK Ultra to explore mind control. Sounds like fiction, but it was very real. The agency tested drugs like LSD on both willing and unwilling subjects, often without their knowledge. People were given hallucinogens and then observed to see how their minds reacted. Some experienced severe paranoia, hallucinations, and long-term mental damage. One case involved a man named Frank Olson, who died under mysterious circumstances after being unknowingly dosed. The goal was to see if minds could be controlled or manipulated for interrogation and espionage. Many records were later destroyed, so the full extent of MK Ultra remains unknown. What we do know is disturbing enough. It crossed ethical lines completely. Imagine finding out your thoughts and behavior were secretly experimented on without your consent. That's the kind of fear MK Ultra leaves behind. 7. The Monster Study. Back in 1939, a speech experiment known as the Monster Study quietly took place at the University of Iowa, and what happened there still feels disturbing even today. Researchers wanted to understand what causes stuttering, so they used orphaned children as their subjects, kids who had no one to defend them. The children were divided into two groups. One group received encouragement and praise for their speech, even if they made mistakes. The other group, however, was constantly criticized. They were told things like, "You are speaking badly," or "You will develop speech problems," even when they were speaking perfectly fine. Over time, the psychological damage became visible. Children who had no speech issues began to lose confidence, hesitate, and develop anxiety around speaking. Some even developed long-term speech problems that followed them into adulthood. Think about that. Just words, repeated over time, completely changed how these kids saw themselves. The experiment didn't just study stuttering, it showed how powerful negative labeling can be. Years later, when details became public, it was widely condemned as deeply unethical. The children were never fully protected, and many carried emotional scars for life. It's a chilling reminder that sometimes the most dangerous experiments don't involve physical harm, but psychological damage that slowly reshapes a person from the inside. 8. The Aversion Project. In apartheid South Africa, a secret military program known as the Aversion Project attempted to cure homosexuality among soldiers. Backed by the military, doctors used extreme and unethical methods, including electric shock therapy, chemical castration, and forced hormone treatments. Victims were often young recruits who trusted the system. Some were even forced into unwanted surgeries. The goal was to change their identity, treating it as a disorder rather than a natural human variation. Many participants were left traumatized, struggling with identity, mental health, and long-term physical effects. What makes this especially disturbing is how it was justified under the guise of medical treatment. It wasn't about helping, it was about control and conformity. Years later, survivors came forward, revealing the emotional and physical pain they endured. This project stands as a dark example of how science can be misused when influenced by prejudice and fear. 9. Holmesburg Prison Experiments. At Holmesburg Prison in Philadelphia, inmates became subjects of medical experiments throughout the mid-20th century. Many prisoners agreed to participate because they were offered small payments, but they were never fully informed about the risks. Researchers tested chemicals, cosmetics, and even toxic substances like dioxin on their skin. Some experiments caused painful reactions, scars, and long-term health problems. Prisoners later described feeling like lab rats. The issue wasn't just the experiments, it was the lack of true consent. These men were in vulnerable positions, often desperate for money, making it easier to exploit them. The experiments raised serious ethical questions about using prisoners in research. Today, Holmesburg is often cited as an example of how easily vulnerable populations can be taken advantage of in the name of science. 10. Project 4.1 Radiation Exposure. After nuclear testing in the Pacific, radioactive fallout affected nearby island populations. Instead of focusing entirely on treatment, researchers studied the exposed individuals under what became known as Project 4.1. People experienced burns, hair loss, and increased cancer risks. Many didn't fully understand what was happening to them. They were monitored over time to see how radiation affected their bodies. While the data helped scientists understand radiation exposure, the ethical concerns remained significant. These were real people suffering real consequences, often without proper care or informed consent. It raises an uncomfortable question: where is the line between research and exploitation? 11. The Guatemala Syphilis Experiments. Between 1946 and 1948, U.S.-funded researchers conducted secret experiments in Guatemala that shocked the world when they were revealed decades later. Subjects, including prisoners, soldiers, and mental health patients, were deliberately infected with syphilis and other diseases. Many had no idea what was being done to them. Some were exposed through infected partners, while others were directly inoculated. Treatment was inconsistent, and many suffered without proper care. The experiment was hidden for years until documents surfaced, leading to global outrage. In 2010, the U.S. government formally apologized. This case is particularly disturbing because it involved intentional harm, not just observation. It crossed every ethical boundary imaginable, showing how easily human rights can be ignored under the excuse of scientific research. 12. Willowbrook Hepatitis Study. At the Willowbrook State School, children with intellectual disabilities were used in hepatitis experiments during the 1950s and 60s. Researchers deliberately infected children to study how the disease spread. Parents were often pressured into giving consent, sometimes being told it was necessary for admission. The justification was that hepatitis was already present in the facility, but that doesn't make it ethical. These were vulnerable children who couldn't defend themselves. Some became seriously ill, and the long-term effects were significant. The study did contribute to medical knowledge, but the cost was high. It sparked major debates about ethics in research and led to stricter protections for human subjects. 13. CIA poison experiments. During the Cold War, the CIA didn't just focus on spying. They also explored the use of poisons and chemical agents in secret experiments that still raise serious concerns today. These tests were part of broader programs linked to covert operations, where the goal was to understand how different substances could affect the human body and mind. In some cases, individuals were unknowingly exposed to chemicals through drinks, injections, or controlled environments. Imagine sitting in a room, thinking everything is normal while your body is reacting to something you didn't even know you consumed. Researchers observed effects like confusion, paralysis, disorientation, and even extreme psychological distress. The intention was to develop tools for interrogation or assassination, but the methods crossed clear ethical lines. Consent was often missing, and many subjects never knew they were part of an experiment. To make things even more unsettling, a large number of documents related to these programs were later destroyed, leaving gaps in what we truly know. Some victims reported long-term health effects, while others were left with unanswered questions about what had happened to them. It's one of those cases where secrecy makes the truth even darker, because if this much is known, you can't help but wonder how much remains hidden. 14. Cocaine addiction studies. In early addiction research, some scientists studied drug dependency by giving substances like cocaine to participants. In certain cases, the subjects were already vulnerable, patients or individuals struggling with mental health. Instead of helping them recover, these experiments sometimes worsened their condition. Participants developed stronger addictions, and long-term effects were not always addressed. The goal was to understand how addiction works, but the methods lacked proper ethical safeguards. It raises an important issue. Can harmful behavior be studied without causing harm? These studies helped shape modern addiction science, but they also highlight the importance of protecting participants. 15. Edgewood Arsenal experiments. Between the 1950s and 1970s, U.S. soldiers at Edgewood Arsenal were used in chemical experiments designed to study the effects of nerve agents and other substances. While many soldiers volunteered, they were not always fully informed about what they would experience. Some were exposed to chemicals that caused hallucinations, confusion, and long-term psychological effects. Others faced physical symptoms that lasted for years. The experiments were meant to prepare for chemical warfare, but they often left participants with lasting damage. Many later came forward, saying they didn't fully understand what they had agreed to. It shows how even voluntary participation can become unethical when transparency is missing. If you enjoyed this video, you won't want to miss the next one. We're exploring the truth behind experiments on animals. Thank you guys. We will see you next week.